Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Here to break down another slate. We have week 3 in college football action. Yonker CFB here to break it down for you. Twitter's down there. Go ahead and give me a follow. I'm assuming most of you are not new. If you are new here, basically what we do, we break down every single game on the DraftKings main slate. I give you information, stuff like snaps, targets, anything that might be useful, any stats I find useful. Right off the top, I'm not a tout. I just do this to provide information. And I hope it helps. If it doesn't help you, then don't watch. If you find it helpful, I appreciate you. Thank you for watching. Good luck this week. One thing off the top, I haven't been saying this as much this year, but it's very important, so I wanted to reiterate this right off the top. Make sure you know your contest selection, especially when you're playing a main slate. Find out what works for you. Personally, for me, I find single entries work the best for me, and that's what I have the most success doing, and I just keep going back to that well, and I do it week in and week out, and I've had good luck with that for a few years. I want to eliminate the luck, right? I want to see what works. It's different for everybody. Everybody's a different kind of player. You can be somebody who plays 150 lineups, and that's totally fine. That's another great way to win. However, if you're one of those people who sees, I can make the 50,000 this week, I'm going to set one lineup. I'm going to put it in the 150 entry. Percentage-wise, you're going to lose. You might win. I mean, sure, it could happen. But percentage-wise, and this is a numbers game, it's just not the best way for you to be doing it. Why not just put that one entry into a single entry if that's what you're doing, right? Because you're going to be going against Sharks who have 150 lineups, and there you are, little minnow with one lineup. So just be aware of that. You can win at this. If you are swinging for the fences 50K, that's great, but it's definitely not the highest percentage of looks. Other than that, just want to say it was a pretty good week last week for me personally. I hope you guys did all right. I hope I helped you in any way. If I did, cool. Let me know about it. I was out and about last week. I was at the Texas-Arkansas game. I saw Arkansas whip Texas's ass. That was pretty cool. I'm not a fan, just enjoying it. I like to travel the country and see the games. Beautiful sport of college football. So no, we're back in the swing of things this week. It's a great week. I've really broken down the slate pretty good, so it'll probably be a longer video. Again, I'll try to keep it short, but it just doesn't work that way, right? If a game's not super interesting, I'll try to speed over it pretty quickly, but it's pretty difficult to just skip over a game, right? I don't really think that's the best way to do it. Oh yeah, background. Terrible background last week. Totally messed that up. So we're trying out a green screen. It's probably not perfect. I got a weird floating head. I'll figure out what to do with this, but yeah, hopefully that's an upgrade. It's just me, myself, and I. This is just me doing this. Nobody here doing it with me. So there are going to be hiccups along the way. I'm not a tech genius. I'm not a camera genius. And I'm not a fantastic talker either, but I try my best, right? So hopefully we're upgrading. Last thing, Prize Picks sponsor the show. Shout out Prize Picks. If you're not on Prize Picks and you're in an eligible state, you're missing out on money. In college football especially, there's money to be made. The MMA stuff is pretty good too. But no, we're doing college football here. That's promo code Yonke, Yonke. Link is in the chat. Go ahead and follow that link. If you are in an eligible state, I will list them down there. You get a 100% deposit match up to $100. So you give $100, they give you $100 back. You can use that instantly. It's not dispersed over time like some other bonus funds. It's dispersed immediately. This is for first-time depositors only. Promo code Yonke. Go ahead and get your 100 free bucks and give a free roll. I'm not going to be going over Prize Picks very much on this show. I'm going to keep this focused to DraftKings since it goes pretty long anyway. I'm going to try to do a weekly Prize Pick show, a pretty short show where I go over my couple favorite ones because we've had very good success with that. I'll say the lines are tightening up a little bit. Not as many Tanner Mordecai, 18.5 fantasy points. Not as many CJ Stroud, 187 passing yards, whatever he was week 1 in Minnesota. Not quite as many of those freebies, but they're doing a lot of cool promos too. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. I'll be posting all my plays there until we get a weekly show going. All right. Last thing, this is available in audio only podcast format. I will put a link as well in the description. Go ahead and check that out. The Campus to Campus podcast feed. It's a weekly long CFF show. So if you're interested in CFF, not just DFS, but for season long on Fantrax, or if you're a Devy player, what have you, I do have a podcast as well with my co-host Kevin Brown. So I'm posting this year under that title. All right, let's get started. Nebraska versus Oklahoma. I feel like it's always a nasty team to start the slate. I think it might have been Nebraska. Week 0 that started the slate. I know they were the early kick. But yeah, I always get excited to talk, and then I have a team like Nebraska. My goodness. All right, so right off the hop. Basically, where we're looking at Nebraska, Adrian Martinez is pretty dangerous. You see right there, he's got 30 fantasy points per game, but he's no good at quarterback. If you watched him play, he's no good at quarterback, but that doesn't matter in fantasy, does it? He's a great fantasy player. Going against Oklahoma, I think they have trouble here. The trouble is PFF has them rated as one of the worst lines in all of college football, and they're going against Oklahoma, where that defense, that's their bread and butter, right? They're looking to wreak havoc, and led by Nick Bonino and company, they do wreak havoc. Their defense has not been stellar. I do expect it to get better as the year goes along, and I think they have a good opportunity here against Nebraska to really show out. But you have to mention Adrian Martinez at 7.3. The pricing's not terrible. When we're looking at our wide receivers, it really depends what's going on with Oliver Martin. It says he isn't expected to take the field against Buffalo. That was last week. He had 10 targets in the first game against Illinois, and he hasn't played since. So if he plays, that definitely changes things. I still think Samori Toure, Montana transfer at 5.6. This guy's a monster. He's really good. I do think he's one of the better wide receivers in college football. It might be a little hyperbolic there, but this guy's a stud. He's going to be their go-to guy. He has 19 targets in 3 games. His average depth of target is 13.8. His ADOT's 13.8, and he gets 19 targets. So that's pretty good. That's a good recipe. He's good at getting open. Oklahoma defense is pretty good, but their secondary, I would say, is probably their weak point. So I think Torrey's a little too cheap at 5.6. Other than that, anyone behind him is not super interesting. Omar Manning and Austin Allen have been the guys behind him, but Omar Manning was last seen with his foot in a boot, and Austin Allen is in concussion protocol. If Austin Allen plays at 3.2K, you have yourself not too bad of a punt there. He's got some decent targets on the season. All right, running back wise, Gabe Ervin and Marquise Stepp, USC transfer. These guys are splitting carries, and then Morrison, the freshman, is also getting carries. So pretty ugly when you're splitting carries and your offensive line is totally overmatched. If you have to play anything, I'd play Ervin, but to be honest, you don't have to. Nobody's forcing you. All right, Oklahoma side of things. First, right off the bat, or I say right off the bat when it's the middle of this because I forgot. Over under here, it's 61.5, so you have to have some interest. However, Oklahoma is a 22.5 point favorite. So Oklahoma here, obviously you're looking at Spencer Rattler. The quarterbacks on this slate, the pricing is pretty odd. I think it's difficult to pay up for one of these quarterbacks, and if you do, I'm not sure you can play 2 quarterbacks unless you play like a Lewis at Colorado, which is pretty dicey, or a Michael Penix. So you just got to decide what you have to do. I think Spencer Rattler, I'll never say no to playing Rattler. I think playing him at that high where he doesn't have great rushing upside and where apparently they're going to bring in this stud freshman Caleb Williams behind him, who's a very good runner. Apparently they're going to bring him in some goal line packages, kind of like Notre Dame, who we'll talk about later. And I think that does hurt Rattler. If you have a guy at 9.5K, and he's not super mobile, but he is a little mobile, you want him to get some rushing touchdowns. You want him to at least have some rushing upside. And while he still has some, it's definitely diminished now that Caleb Williams is back there. They're also competing for carries in the backfield. We have Kennedy Brooks and Eric Gray are splitting carries. Everyone expected Eric Gray to be the guy this year. Transfer from Tennessee, very electric. But I think moral of the story, if you're a Tennessee transfer, most of them just haven't worked out so far. That being said, while Kennedy Brooks is being the leader of this backfield so far, I think you could have some interest in either guy here. Nebraska's defense is good, but we saw Illinois run on them a little bit. Their strength is definitely their secondary. Up front, they are beatable, and you have Oklahoma, who you know is going to run the hell out of the ball. So I think either one of these guys is in play. I don't have a strong read of one over the other. What I will say is Eric Gray is the more electric back. I think if you're looking for a guy who's going to bust some long runs, a guy that maybe not a lot of people are going to be on because he hasn't even had double-digit carries yet, and he totally busted Tulane week 1. That really hurt me when he had 9 carries for 27 yards. So I could see sprinkling in some Gray because he could have a huge game, right? He could bust 2 50-yard touchdown runs, and really I don't see why anybody would be very surprised. But it's a little high risk. I think Kennedy Brooks is probably a little safer. He's been in there on the goal line more than Gray has. Other than that, their wide receivers, Marvin Mims has just been ridiculously priced all season. He's very dangerous. The story with Mims, it's going to be the same over and over again. Last year he didn't play any snaps, but he was extremely dangerous. This year he's finally playing snaps. He hasn't been all that dangerous to defenses as of yet, but we know he's pretty damn good, don't we? All right, as far as we're looking at the snaps, we have Mims and Hazelwood are playing the most snaps. You see they're the 2 highest priced guys there. However, Williams and Woods have been close behind. So you have Mario Williams and Michael Woods, the dangerous deep threat, who we haven't seen a lot of that. So It's going to come eventually. Transfer from Arkansas, Woo Pig Sooie, at 4.8K. These guys are splitting snaps. Mario Williams is a freshman who has been absolutely outstanding. He actually leads the team with 12 targets so far. Is that going to continue? I don't know, but they're using him a lot in the short game. He's pretty dangerous. The highest average depth of target is Mims at 16.7, so he's worth the look as well. But like I said, that pricing's crazy. Stogner's a good tight end. He'll be in there at 3.9K. He's probably a little too cheap. I would assume Williams would be the highest owned guy here. Other than that, Hazelwood and Woods are both fine, but no great plays. And then Mims, if he was cheaper, obviously I'd be all over him, but a little difficult to get to any of these other guys. You're probably going to want some Oklahoma in your lineups, right? All right, Coastal Carolina versus Buffalo. So this one has an over-under of 57.5. Coastal Carolina's 13.5-point favorite, expected to win by 2 touchdowns. Usually this would be a really good game, but Buffalo was just a program and absolutely disaster. Coastal Carolina, they return everyone to what was a good team. Buffalo, they lost their coach, Lance Leopold. Coach I'm very, very high on, went to Kansas. Don't know why. Ain't going to do shit at Kansas because nobody is. That's just the way it is. And then a whole bunch of transfers left with him and left elsewhere as well. So they're really hurt. This is a team that's been very good. Shout out Jarrett Patterson last year. Shout out Kevin Marks. Was looking to have a big year, and then their whole team left. It's like, what are you left with? They lost 28-3 to Nebraska last week, so not a terrible showing, not a good showing. All right. My problem with Coastal is that they play at a slow pace. They only have 62 plays per game. That's not good. Last year, they were extremely, extremely efficient. McCall went off as a freshman. McCall is awesome. Grayson McCall, their quarterback. And he is a dual threat, so he's interesting. And he's not priced all the way up at 9K like some of these other guys. But my issue with McCall, they only threw the ball 23 times per game last year. So how are you going to have a stud fantasy quarterback who throws 23 times per game? Well, he managed it last year. This year, I don't know. I really don't know. They were just so efficient. Is that repeatable? They're going to be efficient, but are they going to be that efficient? I don't know. So he's all right, but to be honest, I'm probably not going to have a ton of him this year in general, unless his price is right or it's a smaller slate. Okay, running backs, they're sharing the carries here between Reese White and Shamari Jones. Reese White was very good to me on, the Friday slate last week. He was very good, had 3 touchdowns, but these guys are splitting carries, and it's pretty even. You look at it, it's pretty even. They should not be this far apart. Reese White's ridiculously priced. I wouldn't recommend playing him at 7.7K. I think Shamari Jones, if you're paying down at running back, I think that's one of the first guys you have to look at. Sharing carries, he got the touchdowns week 1, didn't get them week 2. Maybe he'll get them week 3. Who knows? They're splitting carries. It's really that simple. All right, Hiley is highly overpriced. He does have 14 targets on the year. That is tied with their tight end, Isaiah Likely, who is at 4.4K. So highly likely, if you have this difference and they have the same target share, who are you going to look at? That was pretty corny. I apologize. But everyone probably knows that, right? So, I don't know. Hiley's been a beast. He gets either like 100 yards or a touchdown in every single game, but again, not really a team you can expect to explode. Oh, by the way, regarding the running game, Buffalo does have a super good, super highly rated rush defense by PFF. They have them rated all the way at 92. And, I mean, one of those games was against Nebraska. Not a bad team. So, maybe they have a really good rush D. Hard to tell this early in the season. Other than that, secondary options for Coastal Carolina do not get enough workload to consider. Not even on a Friday slate. Definitely not on a Saturday slate. All right, Buffalo. You probably shouldn't be playing a lot of Buffalo's quarterbacks in DFS because that has not been a winning proposition in many a year. And I'm not expecting it to be a winning proposition here, going against a good Coastal Carolina defense that returns everybody. Keen Williams has been their main guy. I would guess you could consider him. He does have 17 targets in 2 games, which is very interesting. There's a new coaching staff. Maybe they'll start going to these guys more often. And then we see Giovanni Ruiz, their second wide receiver, who has 11 targets in 2 games. He did not practice Tuesday, and he isn't listed on the depth chart. So I think Keen Williams, transfer from Eastern Michigan, I think he actually has some value. You could say you could look at a secondary, you got to step up. I wouldn't hate it, but honestly, I didn't even look into it because playing a secondary Buffalo option is just not all that appealing to me. Marlon Johnson only has 1 catch in the year, so if you expect him to step up, I'm not really sure. Dominic Johnson has more targets, more catches. He's probably the guy you're looking at if you really want to. All right, as far as the running back room, you heard me mention Jarrett Patterson at the top here. Jarrett Patterson, absolute beast last year. Buffalo run game has been absolute beast. I already mentioned they've changed their coaching staff, and it ain't pretty. Early returns are not exactly pretty. Kevin Marks, that being said, probably going to be the workhorse this year. I was very high on him before the coaching change. They're going to be a little outmatched here against Coastal Carolina, but while Coastal Carolina has a good defense, I don't really know if I'd call them like a world beater defense, but they're probably pretty on par with Nebraska, who held this team to 3 points. So I'd say Kevin Marks. You could do worse at 6K for a workman-like running back on a team with that track record, but the game in general just doesn't seem like you want a ton of it. All right, Michigan State versus Miami. We have Miami as 6.5-point favorites at home at Hard Rock, and the over-under is 56.5. I did play a little bit of the over here. Don't feel fantastic about it. The pace is interesting here. Michigan State currently has 93 plays per game, which is a huge step up. They were only at 68 last year. So, I don't know what to say about that. I must have that reversed. There's no way they have 93 plays per game. They must be ranked 93rd. I don't know. I'll fact check that. Bad reporting by me. Don't even listen to that. I'd say the pace is about average for both these teams. I'd say if Michigan State had their way, they would keep it on the ground and not run the ball a whole lot. Michigan State's offense does look improved this year. Whereas Miami only has 19 points per game so far this season, but that's a little misleading. You go ahead and look at the team they were playing. They were playing Alabama, so good luck scoring against Alabama. And then they're playing App State. I think this offense for Miami is still going to be all right. If you've listened to the show, you probably know I'm not the biggest Miami guy, but this is a fantasy show. We put all that behind, right? We focus on where we can. And I think they might be a little undervalued in this spot. I do think they're undervalued. They returned 10 starters on offense, and they're going to score points eventually. All right, but we're not starting with them. We're starting with Michigan State. Peyton Thorne's their quarterback. If you want to go there, great. You could take one look at their stats so far, and you'd see they're averaging 553 yards per game of total offense, 299 rushing yards per game. But you got to look at who they played. They played a Northwestern team that returns only 9 starters, and is just absolute trash. By the way, somehow they're favored this week at Duke. Well, Duke stinks. That's probably why, but Northwestern hasn't shown us anything to be favored, in my opinion. So that might be worth a look. But anyway. And then game 2, they passed the ball. They played an FCS school, and they just passed the ball. So I don't really know if we learned a whole lot here. I will say, Peyton Thorne, I guess he's okay, but He's in consideration, but I think this team's going to run the ball if they can. I think this team does have 2 good wide receivers in Jaden Reed and Jalen Naylor. I also think you have a mispricing here. Are most people going to realize that? Probably. You take one look at the targets, it'll tell you that. Naylor has 14 targets. Reed has 12 on the season. The production has just been flipped so far this year. That's a small sample size. That's 2 games against 2 bad teams. Is that production always going to stay that way? Probably not. Last year, to what's supposed to be a similar game script to what they have here, so mostly playing from behind, Jalen Naylor was good. He had 80-plus yards in 4 of 7 games last year, and that target share was right up there with Jaden Reed. So I think Naylor is way too cheap, and I think he's an all-right play if you're paying down at wide receiver at 4K. Jaden Reed, he's just a little too expensive. All right, at running back, they have Kenneth Walker, an absolute beast. I mentioned they're running for 300 yards so far this year. He went off, 200-plus yards, 4 touchdowns. Elijah Collins behind him is doubtful. They even had, I think it's Hayward moved to tight end, so they've had guys behind him change positions, be injured. Walker's a beast. Played at Wake Forest. Huge fan of them there. Huge fan of him at Michigan State. He's really good. Going against this Miami rush defense, I will say I have pause. Why do I have pause? Because Miami held Alabama to under 4 yards per carry in the opener. And you probably didn't notice that, because maybe you did. Maybe you're astute. I don't know why I'm assuming you're a blockhead. But a lot of people didn't notice that because they just said Miami got their shit kicked in. And they did get their shit kicked in. But we expected that, right? Anybody that knows anything knows Miami, when they go in big games, especially against a team like Alabama, it doesn't really end well. If you watched that UNC game last year, what did you think was going to happen? Bama's a little bit better than UNC. Anyway, I digress. They still had a good rush D in that game. Despite getting blown out, they held them to under 4 yards per carry. Against Alabama, how often do you see that at Alabama? Not very often. This isn't Georgia, who just does that every now and then, doesn't have a run game. No, Alabama's really freaking good at all facets of the game. So they might have a good rush D. I'm not sold on it, but I think it's decent. So anyway, Walker's okay, but that's something to consider. Miami does have a problem giving up big plays. So if you're looking at Walker or Naylor, so far they're 122nd in coverage grade as well, which is not great. Consider the level of opposition though. But last year they were in the 80s, so it's not a fantastic Miami secondary. All right, as for Miami, just be pretty brief on them. I think they're too cheap. Derek King is a good dual threat quarterback, and while he is coming off of surgery, I think he's looked really good. Well, I don't say he's looked really good. He hasn't looked perfect, but last week he was running the ball a lot, ran for over 70 yards, whatever it was, on a dozen carries. And he looks all right at 7.6K at home as a touchdown favorite. I think he could do worse than Derek King. Cameron Harris, if you listen to the show, you probably know I'm not a big Cameron Harris fan, but I think that changes now that Knighton and Chaney are out. These are their number. Chaney was kind of a 1B, and Knighton was more of the passing down work guy. So I think Harris is the clear workhorse at 5.4K, going against a team that allowed 35.1 points per game last year. And even Northwestern, I think they only scored 21 points. They were still moving the ball, and they had Hunter Johnson at quarterback. Hunter Johnson, fellas. And they were still moving the ball against this team. So I think he could do worse with any Miami player. And actually, Cameron Harris, I might be forcing playing a little Cameron Harris. I don't want to, but I might. He is a big play guy. He's a little boomer bust. Keep that in mind. All right, wide receivers. Harley is still the number one guy. Hasn't shown it yet this year, but he is still the number one guy by most accounts. Rambo, Oklahoma transfers close behind. I don't love the pricing on either one of these guys, but if you want a stat king, you could probably afford it. Other than that, Restrepo has been out there a decent amount at 3.5. He's a good wide receiver. He's not out there on every snap, but he's out there a decent amount. He's a good play. And then Will Mallory at 3.6K. Look, he hasn't done squat this year, but when you go ahead and take a look at Will Mallory, you realize he does have 7 targets, and he actually leads the team in snaps. I think he ran track in high school, and now he's just a beast. I think Will Mallory's too cheap. I think if you're stacking King, it's probably the way to do it. I'm not saying he's guaranteed to be, Mike Harley. If I had even odds, I'd say Mike Harley has more fantasy points, obviously, but price adjusted. Mallory's not too bad. As far as targets go, actually, Rambo's had the most targets. He has 16. Harley has 11, and then this guy Smith has 10. Mallory and Restrepo each have 7. All right, Virginia Tech. West Virginia, not a very good fantasy game, so I'll try to be brief on this one. Virginia Tech, 3-point dogs. I did play a little Virginia Tech at the opener. Now, that might be a little bit of a square bet, right? Because they've looked really good at home, but now they're traveling out of Lane Stadium, so we're really going to see what kind of team they are, right? And West Virginia's pretty good at home, but I'm just not a big West Virginia fan. They had a lot of transfers out this year. I'm not sure about their defense. Their defense was great last year. Only allowed 295 yards per game. That's elite. And then this year, it's only 291 per game. So you'd say, oh my God, they're getting even better. Well, they had a lot of transfers out, and one of those games was against an FCS school. So I don't know. Maryland looks pretty good throwing the ball against them. Maryland actually threw for over 300 yards. Tua's brother lit him up pretty good, Talia. All right, as far as the game goes, yeah, Fuente is a pretty good game coach. He gets shitted on for recruiting, but I actually think he's a pretty good game coach. And I do think Neil Brown on the other side is a good game coach. So while West Virginia's a pretty ugly team, in my opinion, to watch, I think this is actually a really good game, just not a very fun one to watch. All right, as far as pace, it's pretty ugly. Virginia Tech ranked 92nd in pace this year. West Virginia 103rd. So I did play a little under once I saw the pace metrics, once I saw the matchups where Virginia Tech's pretty good defending the run. West Virginia, Letty Brown's their best player, and West Virginia may be a little beatable on the pass, but Braxton Burmeister can't pass. So that's the story on Burmeister. 6.8K. Like I said, the pricing here, there's not really one quarterback I love on the slate. I'm going to play a little of these middle range guys, but on a game where I play the under, I'm not so sure. Braxton Burmeister is a pretty good dual threat. You may not think that when you look at him athletically, but he is extremely athletic. Already has a rushing touchdown and has almost 100 yards in 2 games running the ball. So I think you could do worse than Burmeister. Never really a guy that gets me excited. I feel like if I play him, I'm just kind of hoping for like 24 points, which might get the job done at 6.8K, but it's not great, right? All right, as far as running backs, I want absolutely nothing to do with this running back room. In a game where I played the under and where Blackshear and Holston are splitting carries, I just don't really see why I would do that. Holston's the better runner. Blackshear, probably the better overall player, more dynamic receiver. Will get some work. I guess Blackshear's okay at 5.4K. All right. Wide receiver wise, big news is that James Mitchell, their star tight end, is out for the year, and I do think that's big. They use him a lot. They use him in a lot of different ways. So Trey Turner and Travion Robinson are 2 pretty good wide receivers, but this is just not a good fantasy offense. Turner has 12 targets so far. Robinson has 9. That's all I need to say about them, I think. All right, West Virginia, Jared Dagey, another one of those guys. West Virginia seems to be on every single slate. Why? I don't know. They've been throwing the ball a lot. More likely to throw the ball for 40 times in a game than they have been in a couple of years. But this guy's yards per attempt has always been pretty brutal. Never been all that efficient. I would say probably the way to beat Virginia Tech after watching how good their run D was against North Carolina, it's probably through the air. So maybe they'll see that and maybe he'll attempt a lot of passes. I view him similarly as Burmeister. In a game that it's not going to be very high scoring, it's not great. As far as his wide receivers, Winston Wright would be the guy to look at 5.7K. One of the best kick returners in college football, apparently, averaging over 50 yards per kick return. So if they start giving him the ball more, they probably should. He's their best guy. Anyone behind him, kind of splitting. All right, Letty Brown, another guy I just don't love playing, but the volume is so good with Letty Brown. Like I said, tough matchup against this Virginia Tech defense. 3.2 yards per carry allowed, pretty nasty. But Letty Brown's volume is just insane. So it's tough because how many points are you really expecting his team to score? Does it really matter? If they score 17 points, he could still get 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he catches a lot of passes, maybe 4 or 5. So he's okay. I don't really know how high his upside is in this matchup, but at 6.9K, he's usually more expensive than that, is what I'll say. So there are a lot of backs kind of right in that range, like 6.9 to 7.3, that are decent. I think he's in consideration. With that volume, anyone has to be in consideration, right? All right, Cincinnati versus Indiana. Cincinnati, currently minus 4-point favorites. This is a good game right here. Over-under is only at 50, so not a great fantasy game, similar to the last one. All right, so the game in general. Indy has been looking terrible so far. They've looked awful. They threw 2 pick sixes against Iowa, had 3 picks in that one, did Penix. And then Penix had a 4-point-something yards per attempt, so under 5 yards per attempt against an FCS school last week. So that's not what you want to see. Really not what you want to see, especially when you're going against a nasty Cincinnati defense now. All right, as far as pace, Cincinnati's 121st in the country in plays per game, whereas Indiana's 97th. So that's pretty bad as well. You can see that low over-under. Looking at Desmond Ridder, not a huge Desmond Ridder guy in general, but he's been in college forever and he's a good runner. So you always have to mention him. I just don't really think it sets up very well in this matchup. I do think Indiana has a pretty good secondary. You'd be really hoping on Ridder to run for 100 yards and a score, run for 2 scores, something like that. And hey, he does that pretty often. So Ridder at 8.6, he's an option. One way some people are going to look at this is there's some elite quarterbacks on the slate. Ridder has produced at an elite level, and he's not quite priced with those elite guys. So I guess I could see some merit to that, but I don't see how you could be overly confident in it. All right, Jerome Ford, Alabama transfer, taking over the lead back role, which should have happened last year. Instead, they ran Jared Dokes into a wall over and over again, and then some team decided to draft him because he had good measurables. But I don't know, watch him play football maybe. Just disappointed over and over last year. So that's how I feel about Cincinnati running backs. But in general, Jerome Ford's just a way better back, way more explosive back. He has over 100 yards in each game so far, 4 total touchdowns. Obviously gets a stiffer test here, is what I'll say. But he's one of those running backs I was mentioned. It's hard to choose from these guys, and he's very explosive. You could do worse. Indiana didn't do too bad against Iowa, who's a very good running team. Didn't do too bad. Didn't do great. I'd say they're probably better running the ball than Cincinnati. I don't think Cincinnati has a very good offensive line. So it's kind of boom or bust if you're playing for it. I don't feel like he's a safe option, whereas Letty Brown's a little safer. Cincinnati wide receivers, we do not play them. As a rule, basically, we don't play them. Josh Wiley, their tight end, he's not a receiver, so we can consider him. He's pretty good. At 4.2K, that's not an awful price. Maybe. Indiana. Yeah, offense has been terrible, like I said. This is probably the best secondary in the G5. Cincinnati, led by Sauce Gardner, Kobe Bryant and company. Maybe top 5 in the country. It's a really good secondary. They have a pretty good defensive line. I just don't know how many points since Indiana's going to score here. And like I said, Michael Penix hasn't looked good. That being said, Michael Penix at 5.4, if I told you that going into the year, you'd be pretty shocked. So if we're going to pay down at quarterback, you're getting a decent quarterback who has some pretty good options to throw to, is about what I'll say. Don't play Stephen Carr going against a good rush D that's allowed only 3.2 yards per carry. Baldwin will probably see some carries behind him. And Carr's a pretty good receiver as well. Transferred from USC, so he's not awful, but there are better options. All right, Ty Freifogel is really cheap. Tough matchup, like I mentioned, so not a for sure play, but he's their clear number one guy. Has 16 targets so far in 2 games, whereas DJ Matthews has 10, and then Marshall all the way down at 3.1K has 5. But Marshall is out there on a lot of snaps, so 3.1K you probably shouldn't be min priced either. Freifogel's dangerous. If you saw him last year, had some absolutely monster games, right? Put up like 240 burgers. He's been okay so far this year, but really not great. 5 catches in each game, had a touchdown to save him in one of them. You could do worse. He's the clear number one option. That's about where it stops with Indiana. All right, another not great game for fantasy. Minnesota versus Colorado. Both teams are actually pretty similar here. They're both going to try to run the ball. They're kind of carbon copies of one another, to be honest with you. All right, play-wise, Minnesota's only averaging 67.5 snaps per game. Colorado only 63. It's not really what you want to see for DraftKings. Minnesota did struggle last week against Miami of Ohio. They only won 31-26. They couldn't even gain 300 yards in that matchup. So I don't really know what to say about them. The passing offense has just been totally inept under Tanner Morgan. So could he have success here? Sure, I guess he could, but he's just been bad, and they haven't thrown the ball a lot. As far as his wide receivers, Chris Ottman-Bell should be their top guy, but apparently he's practicing. The reports have been really bad. I remember saying week 1, they kept trying to act like Ottman-Bell was going to play, and I tried saying, I don't think he's going to play. Fortunately, I had the wrong receiver behind him in Jackson instead of Wright, but I just don't know. I don't really trust the reporting on Ottman-Bell, so who knows if he's going to play. If he's out, so if he plays, he's probably not 100%. If he's out, Dylan Wright looks really good. I think he's a Texas A&M transfer somewhere. Looks really good. Has 15 targets so far, whereas Jackson, pretty good player as well, has 12. So pretty good players, but just not a team that throws the ball a lot. All right, as far as the running back room, so Muhammad Ibrahim's out for the year, right? And then Trey Potts steps up. I tried telling people on Twitter, and people were telling me he wasn't going to get a big workload. And then what happened was he had 34 carries for 178 yards and 2 touchdowns. So Potts stepping in for Mo Ibrahim. I think he looks pretty good. I thought he looked really good in Ohio State. I actually thought he popped off the screen. I said, who the hell is that guy? That guy looks really good. Is he Mo Ibrahim? Probably not, but he's pretty solid. So just phenomenal workload as the Minnesota running back is basically the book on this team. I will say there were definitely some reports out there. Their offensive coordinator, Sanford, he gave a pretty long quote about how they're going to get other running backs involved, how they want to give them carries, but I feel like I've seen that quote before from him, and it really hasn't come to fruition. So I guess I'll kind of believe it when I see it, but that is a warning sign I saw out there. So I think Potts is a fine play. As far as the Colorado rush defense, though, I played a lot of Isaiah Spiller against them, Texas A&M last week, and that didn't go well. I think this Colorado rush D might actually be good. They were not great last year. They do get Nate Landman back, one of the best linebackers, especially stopping the run in college football. They might just be good defending the run. I might have just underrated them, and that could be the case because they're continuing to change their culture there, and it could be paying off because they want to be a physical, run the ball team and defend the run well. As well. So is it like something we were seeing at UCLA where they're improving in both assets year after year? I don't know. It's a little early to say, but I will say I'm pretty surprised, even with Texas A&M having the quarterback situation they are. I thought for sure they'd be able to run the ball, and they just couldn't. So tough to say, but I still think Potts is probably in play. Not a guy I feel fantastic about, but the volume's going to be really, really good. All right, Colorado. Call me crazy. I don't think Brendan Lewis, their quarterback, is the worst play at 5.5K. And it's pretty dicey because this offense hasn't done anything. Really haven't done anything passing the ball. Couldn't pass the ball against Northern Colorado, an FCS school. But of course they couldn't throw the ball against Texas A&M, right? So thing with Lewis, a guy this cheap who's a dual threat, you always have to at least kind of consider him. He has over 100 rushing yards this year, and I really don't know if they've emptied the tank in that facet. Now, the throwing production is awful, right? Not even at 200 yards in 2 games. 1 touchdown, 1 pick. But when he's that low price, Couldn't you just see him stumbling into rushing touchdowns? I don't know. I don't want to play a lot of him, but I might have to have some shares. You're playing 150 lineups. I feel like you need at least one share, which I know, not very confident take, right? Something's telling me Brendan Lewis, I shouldn't at least completely fade him, but it's dicey. It's really, really dicey. You probably won't hear many other people recommending Brendan Lewis, and it might be for good reason. All right, the running backs, they feed Jarek Broussard, or at least they fed him a lot last year. That's looking to change a little bit. Fontenot and Clayton combined for 15 carries last week, and they got the carries in the opener as well. However, Broussard did leave last week with an injury. They said he should be good to go, but I don't know about this guy. He's been injured before, always wears that big old knee brace. I just don't know how to feel about him being injured and coming back here. Other way to look at this is, hey, he's only 5.7K. Traditionally, he's gotten great volume, and this should be a game that's primarily played on the ground. So you could look at it either way. I don't have tremendous confidence on either side, to be honest with you. I don't know. They've given a lot of quotes in the offseason that said they're going to share the workload more, and unlike Minnesota, it looks like they've actually done it. However, if Broussard's healthy, he's still pretty clearly the 1A, so... no strong take there. That's a difficult read. It's a really difficult read here. I will say Colorado's a lot better on the at home than on the road, and this is a pretty close game. So maybe they're going to stick to their guns, which would be Broussard. I don't know. The wide receivers are a mess, so I won't spend too much time on them. I thought Levante Chenault, Laviska Chenault's brother, I thought he was like the most talented guy on the team, honestly, after watching the spring game and seeing some highlights from what I liked what I saw. But apparently he can't stay out of trouble, and now he's suspended, so... Now it's even more of a mess at the wide receiver room. Arias leads the team in targets, but he only has 6. So that's about all you need to know there. It's a little ugly. Him, Stanley, and Rice will see the field the most. Yes, that's Jerry Rice's son, Brendan Rice. He's explosive. We saw him do it twice in what was that, the Utah game last year in the snow. Had 2 explosive plays, but haven't really seen much else yet. So really throwing flyers there if you're trying. All right, Purdue, Notre Dame. Notre Dame has not looked good this year, to say the least. Yes, I pulled from Notre Dame. They haven't looked good. Usually they dominate the line of scrimmage. They haven't been doing that. I think we've seen signs the defensive line might be improving, but the offensive line has been really bad. Now they're injured. Now Blake Fisher's out, and then the guy who came in to replace Blake Fisher's also banged up, maybe out. So it's not good. It's not good at all. However, when we're looking at pace here, we have Purdue with 76 snaps per game, Notre Dame 72.5. Those are both top 30 teams as far as pace. They've both been scoring the ball pretty decently. Purdue gave up almost 30 points per game last year, and Notre Dame looked bad everywhere. Couldn't stop Florida State, and Toledo scored on them as well. I disrespected Toledo. I accidentally left them out of my preview last week, and then they almost beat my boys. So. I think until we see improvement from this Notre Dame defense, we're just going to have to assume they're not as good as they were last year. I mean, that's pretty clear. They don't have Clark Lee as their defensive coordinator. You know, Marcus Freeman's supposed to be the hot next defensive coordinator, and there's no way. He's just not Clark Lee. Basically, Clark Lee's pretty much as good as you can get as defensive coordinator. And if he's not Clark Lee, he's not as good. That's just the way it is. Maybe he's close. Maybe he's going to be really close one day. But right now, they look like absolute shit. So I don't know. Okay. Purdue, they have a solid quarterback in Jack Plummer. The toughest D he's faced yet is probably Notre Dame, even though they haven't looked good, because they played some garbage teams, UConn and somebody else who doesn't play any defense. And, I mean, he scored 25 points. This is the highest he scored, so I'm not sure on his ceiling. But we know Jeff Brom really likes to throw the ball, and I guess they could have success here against Notre Dame. 7.9K. If he was cheaper, I'd probably play a decent amount of him with this game total. But that's a little high for Jack Plummer. I think he's okay. David Bell at 7.7K. If you can pay up, you probably want to. One of the best wide receivers in college football. We've seen the way they feed their top guy. We've seen them do it with Rondale Moore. We saw them do it with David Bell when Rondale Moore was out. Well, now there's no Rondale Moore. He's catching passes for Arizona. Had a pretty good game in week 1, actually. He's a stud. But he's gone. Now it's David Bell. He's the next guy up. 18 targets in 2 games. What is there not to like against the defense that's been torched once and then didn't look great the other time? Although the corners did look pretty good last week, but that's against a MAC team. What do you expect? All right, Payne Durham, their tight end. pretty good. He has 12 targets. Anthrop behind him has 12 targets, so at 3.8K he might be a little cheap. However, he's not on the field all the time. A guy who is on the field almost all the time, a guy who is expected to have a decent year, be their wide receiver too, is Milton Wright. But this guy has 3 targets all year. 3 targets all year, only 2 catches. Not really sure what's going on with Milton Wright, but if you're really looking for a punt, you could probably do worse and just hope it's just a game, 2 blowouts where he didn't get targeted. Well, the first game wasn't a blowout. Oregon State wasn't, so I really don't know what's going on there. That's kind of weird. Payne Durham, the tight end, has been absolutely fantastic. I think he's going to get a decent workload all season long. I think he's pretty dang good. 6.6, that's a little steep to be paying for a tight end, but you could do worse. At running back, Xander Horvath usually catches a lot of passes. They're not a good running team at all. If we see any improvement from Notre Dame rush defense, this would be the game to do it. They probably will. But if you're looking for a cheaper corny running back, you could look at King Daru. I don't really think you should do that. If you're looking for a total punt, and I don't really know if I recommend this, but if you really need a mid-price guy, they've been saying they're going to give this guy Jaquez Cross, third string running back, so moved up to second, I believe. Now that Xander Horvath and Samson James are both out, they've been saying he might get some work, him and Downing. But Downing's 4.2K, so maybe Downing looks like the second guy. Had 14 carries last week in a blowout. But Cross might be on the field a little bit, is the best I can say for him. All right, Notre Dame. Jack Cohn's been lighting up the scoreboard, surprisingly. Wisconsin transfer, not much expected of him. He's hit 69% of his throws so far, over 600 yards, 6 touchdowns, and only 2 picks. He's kind of proved that he's going to carry this team. They've suffered through a lot of diversity, and he's proved he's been pretty damn good. Issue is Buckner, the freshman. Tyler Buckner got in for some snaps last game. You can see there it's like an Anthony Richardson effect with Florida. They said after the game the reason they put him in there, not because Cohn was struggling or anything, because Cohn's been pretty good. They're just doing it to jumpstart the rushing offense, because the rushing offense has been absolutely awful over the first couple of weeks. And it did jumpstart the offense. I think they had close to 0 rushing yards. It was like 5 or less against Toledo in that game. And then they put in Buckner, and they immediately ran for like over 60 yards on that drive and went and scored a touchdown. So I think Buckner's going to see, he's going to have some packages. Probably going to see some goal line work, I would guess. But Cohn, which makes it tough to play Cohn, right, at 8.1K. That makes it really hard. This is also a Notre Dame team. We know they don't really want to throw the ball. They said after the Florida State game, Jack Cohn lit him up. That was great. But it's a good thing he did, because we didn't want to play like that, right? They said it afterwards. Kelly said it. We wanted to run the ball, and we just couldn't do it very well. Can they do it well here? I hope so. But who knows? They've looked like crap. So do they turn it around or not? This team is not as good as they have been in years past, so it's not exactly a complete assumption they will turn it around. All right, at wide receiver, Michael Mayer has 22 targets, the tight end. This guy's a stud. He's dropped a lot of passes, which is disappointing, but he has 22 targets in 2 games. I think last week I basically said his pricing was ridiculous. It's Kyle Pitts pricing territory, and it pretty much is. And what does he go and do? He puts up 2 touchdowns, 27 points, right after a 30-burger the week before. I don't know. It's hard for me to pay up there for a tight end. But until he has a bad game, I don't know if you can assume he's going to. So up to you if you play Meyer. Kevin Austin, the guy behind him, is their best wide receiver. He has 14 targets. Looks really good. Looks like he has some athleticism that the rest of this team doesn't have. And it really looks like a wide receiver one they needed last year. Looks like he's going to be that. All right, Kyron Williams. Like I said, they've struggled to run the ball, but Kyron Williams is still produced. You see there, over 20 fantasy points in each game so far. He's basically their offense. He's had 9 receptions so far, which is a good improvement. He is a good receiver. We have seen in the past when their games are closer that he gets more receptions. So in a season where they're just not quite as good as they were last year, maybe their games will be closer. Maybe they'll keep seeing that receiving work. He's another running back in that tier I'm talking about, where really good workload, but kind of pick and choose. There's not one standout guy. I think Kyron Williams is always going to be in play. All right, Georgia Tech Clemson. I don't think I'm going to have very much to say on this game. Georgia Tech plus 28.5 currently, and Clemson, the over-under is at 52. So not really a yummy fantasy game. Jeff Sims, starting quarterback for Georgia Tech, is uh, is questionable. He didn't play last week. Yates threw for 4 touchdowns in his absence. So do they have a quarterback battle? Yeah, maybe they do. Do they both see the field? Yeah, maybe they do. I don't really think it's assumed that Sims just comes back right away and steals the job. And even if he did, he's playing Clemson. So, yeah, good luck figuring that one out. Jahmyr Gibbs at 5.1K. Really easy to talk yourself into playing Jahmyr Gibbs this week. I know they're playing Clemson. I know Clemson's defense held Georgia to 10 points. I know they're fantastic. I know they have a great D-line. But Jahmyr Gibbs is just dangerous. And he gets a lot of receiving work. Yeah, played his over 2 receptions already on Prize Picks. Go ahead and jump in on that if you haven't. He's just dangerous is the only way to put it. So it's GPP only because who knows? He could have like 20 rushing yards. But he could have 70 receiving yards and a touchdown. So I'm not going to play a ton of him. But at 5.1K, that's just really cheap for one of the best running backs in college football. So just be cautious. All right, McGowan and Carter on the field a lot, but I don't really see how you would play him against Clemson. It's as simple as it is. Okay, Clemson, DJU's at 8.8K. Obviously, he's going to be in consideration this week going against the bad Georgia Tech defense. One of the top quarterbacks in all college football. Looked terrible against Georgia. This is not Georgia. He's in consideration. All right, at running back, the news is that Will Shipley, the 5-star freshman, is now listed as a co-starter with Kobe Pace. Will Shipley's his snap count went way up last week, as expected. He had 80 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. I hope you played him on FanDuel. He was like stone-ass minimum pricing and had a pretty good game. So I hope you played him there. At 5.3K, it's all right. I think it's going to be a pretty volatile situation with him and Pace. I guess you could play both, but I just don't think the workload's safe at all. And you're going to need an explosive play as Shipley probably to hit value, which you could get against Georgia Tech, right? So they're all right. All right, as far as wide receivers, Nada has been their go-to guy. He has 13 targets, but Ross is actually close behind at 12. Ross obviously has the higher pedigree. In my opinion, Nada just looks fresher, just looks a little better. He'd be the guy I would go to, but not super confident in that one. I think the pricing is pretty cheap here against Georgia Tech. I'd imagine they're pretty popular as well. Other than that, E.J. Williams, pretty good wide receiver. I actually really like E.J. Williams, but he's playing through, I think it's a broken thumb. It's a pretty messed up thumb, whatever happened to it. They were considering surgery. They said he's going to play through it. I just don't really know if I love that, playing injured. You can make a case he's too cheap at 3.8K, though. All right, Alabama, Florida. Over-under in this one, 58.5. I think that's gone up a decent amount since I posted that. I think it's in the 60s now. Maybe I'm wrong. 58.5. Bama minus 15-point favorites. Bryce Young, he's the quarterback at Alabama. So, of course, you could play him. He's looked absolutely fantastic. The pace in this one's pretty good. Florida's ranked 21st in the country. Bama's ranked 43rd. Some weird game scripts in there, but both these teams usually have slightly weird game scripts, especially Alabama. I will say the only concern with Bryce Young is that he's playing in the swamp, right? A very difficult place to play in Florida. He did play at Miami in that was a neutral game, wasn't it? So yeah, that makes me a little nervous. Does make me a little nervous. Now Florida State's defense isn't good. They played cupcake so far this year, so the stats don't really mean anything. But we go back to last year, they just had a bad defense, straight up. It was bad. 428 yards per game given up and 6.1 yards per play. That's bad. Todd Grantham, not the best defensive coordinator. A lot of folks thought he was going to get fired after last year. He's back, and Alabama knows exactly what to do to him. That being said, it's still a hard place to play. We've seen some young quarterbacks struggle in their first road starts because there weren't really fans last year, right? And the Swamp's a hell of a place to play, so it does make me a little bit nervous. Obviously, he's still in consideration, though. All right, as far as who he's throwing to, Mechie's the top guy. I think it's a little close with him and Jameson, so that pricing's probably right. Mechie has 13 targets. Jameson has 12. However, the difference on those targets, their average depth of target, Mechie's is only 8. He has an 8 out of 8, whereas Jameson has 20.3. So over 12 yards on their average depth of target. So Jameson probably a better GPP guy, but honestly, I think Mechie's probably the wide receiver 1. I think either guy's in play. Behind them, Latu, their tight ends, but on the field a lot. Got 2 touchdowns in the opener, but not a pretty risky guy. JoJo Earl's snap count went way up last week, but like I said, be cautious on these snap counts in these blowout games, like Shipley last week. Like, who knows, right? They're playing Cupcake. Who knows if that's going to continue? I think Slade Bolden, I think him and Earl are going to be rotating a little bit, so that makes me a little nervous. Bolden's probably too cheap, but I don't know if you can get there where the snap count is in flux like that. Oh, running backs. All right, as far as running backs, Robinson's the guy. Brian Robinson's the guy. He's led the team in rushing each of the first 2 games, but it's not like it's by a whole lot. He's only had 12 carries is his most. He's had 12 carries and then 10. So until we see him start getting more carries, it's difficult to play him here, even though he's going against pretty bad defense in a game there, 3-score favorites. I think he could do worse. I think he's okay. He's in play. But like I said, they didn't even have 4 yards per rush against Miami. So does that improve? Almost definitely. But the offensive line just hasn't looked quite as juggernautishly good as usual. Juggernautishly, probably not a word, but it is now. Other than that, the snaps have been pretty even. So Robinson, 23. Roydale Williams down there at 3.1K has 17 snaps. So that might be interesting. And Trey Sanders has 17 as well. All right, Florida, the quarterback situation. Basically, Emory Jones is the starter at 6.5K. Played some of him last week. He did not pay off for us. That was bad. That was my bad. Anthony Richardson, 6.6K. He's looked absolutely dynamic, but he's done that mostly against second and third stringers. And do we expect him to be that explosive now that he has an injured hamstring and now that he's playing against Alabama's defense? One of the best defenses in the country? I think probably not, so probably had to avoid this room. Running back room, I think you have to avoid. Good defense. They split carries. I think Malik Davis should be priced over Pierce, personally. So if you think you see value in that, sure, go ahead. As far as the wide receivers, Copeland has an average depth of target of 21.7, so that's pretty impressive. It's mainly him and Shorter are the guys to look at. I think Shorter is probably a little too cheap. I don't really want to play anyone here. Rick Wells looked pretty good, but he's not really getting on the field all that much. I have played Gamble, their tight end. I've played him 2 weeks in a row because he's stone cold minimum, and he's done absolutely nothing 2 weeks in a row. Do I go back to him here? I don't know. That's insanity at this point, right? That's the definition of it right there. But he's been out there every single play. He's been running routes and somehow only has 1 target. So I don't know what he did wrong, but both the quarterbacks hate him. I don't know. Yeah, that's Florida. Okay. 3 more games here. Getting close. This one, pretty good one. USC versus Washington State. I won't even spend a lot of time on Clay Helton. But yeah, Clay Helton was fired, coach at USC. So we're not really sure what it's going to look like in the short term. Graham Harrell's still calling the plays. I don't think too much will change with the offense. Pace of play pretty good for USC, 29th. But Wazoo's only 103rd, which I was a little bit surprising when I looked at it. You have to have interest in Keaton Slovis because he's really cheap, so it'll probably be pretty highly owned because it's kind of obvious. But maybe, I don't know, they'll just see USC as a dumpster fire. I don't really know what people will think, honestly. The ownership's pretty hard to project here, but he'll probably be pretty highly owned, and I will probably have a lot of Keaton Slovis as well. I played a lot of Keaton Slovis 2 years ago, and he won me a lot of money. Played a decent amount of Keaton Slovis last year. He didn't win me very much money, so I don't really know what to feel about Keaton Slovis, but at the end of the day, they threw the ball 44 times per game last year. They're throwing the ball 39 times per game this year, and they're going against a Washington State team that just let Portland State, FCF school, Portland State, throw for 318 yards and run for over 100 as well. And they also let Utah State go for 441 total yards in the opener. So not a good Washington State defense at all. As far as the stacking options, it's obviously Drake London. He has a massive 24 targets through 2 games. But yeah, he tweaked his back last week. So if you click on that note, that's what's going to tell you. He tweaked his back. Allegedly he's going to play, but the reporting hasn't been great. It makes me a little nervous. If you're paying 7.9K, I'd assume a lot of people aren't going to do that if they think he has a tweaked back, which it sounds like he does. So I would keep looking for news on that. If you're going to play London, I'd say right now it's hard for me to put him in too many lineups with that being the case. Behind him, Taj Washington, Memphis transfer, does have 14 targets in 2 games. Pretty good. And then Gary Bryant at 3.6K. Came back last week. He's always injured. He's always had troubles. He actually had 5 targets in his first game. Played primarily in the slot, which in the offseason they said he was going to move out wide. Looks like that wasn't true. He was playing in the slot. He's a speedster. He's pretty good. He was a big recruit. And he was on the field a lot and got 5 targets. So 3.6K. I think you could do worse if you're paying way down. Washington at 5K. I would assume he should probably be 6.4K. It would be my accurate pricing, somewhere in there. So he's probably too cheap as well. Anyone behind them has not really shown anything. So throw in a dart. If you're going to throw a dart, just throw it at Bryant. All right, Washington State, man. I think Jaden Delore is a good play this week too. But the reason you can't confidently play him is that Nick Rolovich, weirdo, that Nick Rolovich, he seems to have an affinity for Jared Garantano. I don't know if it was the pick sixes he was throwing in the spring game. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it was the game film where he saw those pick sixes. I don't know what it is, but maybe he thought he was going to have his own Matt Schaub at quarterback. Jared Garantano. I don't get it. Another Tennessee transfer we're talking about here. I just don't get it. But it seems like Rolovich, he started him game 1. Maybe that was a motivational tactic for Delora because Delora got a DUI in the offseason. But something weird's going on. Sounds like Garantano could have played last week and didn't. Delora played very well, got all the snaps, played very well, granted against an FCS school. And that just makes me nervous because I would assume Delora starts. I'd assume Delora plays, but if he struggles for 2 or 3 drives, which he might, USC has a pretty good defensive line. Who knows? Even though they looked awful against Stanford last week, they're still talented. Who knows? If they struggle at home here, Garantano could be coming in. If he doesn't come in, Delora probably has a pretty good game. So it's risky, but it could pay off pretty well. So if you're playing multiple lineups, you're probably going to want some. As far as the stacking options, I think these guys are all too cheap. I think Travell Harris is a fantastic price point. So far, Stribling has 15 targets. Let's see here. Stribling has 15. Harris has 14. Jackson has 14. And Ollie only has 6, but he's been out there for pretty much every snap. So I think these guys are all too cheap. I think Stribling at 4.2K is definitely too cheap. Talented freshman. They like going his way. Delora was throwing his way a lot in the opener. But I think Travell Harris is pretty clearly underpriced here. One of the most elusive guys, according to PFF, over the last couple of years. He put up 29 catches, 340 yards, and 2 touchdowns in only 4 games last year. So he's a solid player. Any of these guys, you could do worse. Running backs wise, I skipped USC. No interest in USC's running backs. They run a committee. Malapai and Ingram are the top 2. Washington State, maybe some interest. I wish Max Borghi was cheaper. I'd probably play some of him here. USC is allowing 6.4 yards per play so far this year. That's not good, folks. Allowing 271 passing yards per game. So I think I'm mostly going to be looking at the passing game. However, Borghi is one of the most talented running backs in college football. All right. 2 more games here. Florida State, Wake Forest. Allegedly Mackenzie Milton's going to be the starter this week, but who really knows what's going on with that? I would not be shocked at all if Jordan Travis still saw some snaps. Mackenzie Milton looked really good when he came in against Notre Dame in limited time, and then he looked really bad last week. Florida State's in a weird place. They're kicking some dudes off the team. Hearing some rumors about guys not running wind sprints, getting kicked off the team, not really listening to the coach. Mike Norvell still has a lot of work to do here. Still think this is more of a long-term project at Florida State, even though they looked pretty good in week 1. One thing you need to know, they have lost their last 11 road games straight up. So picking them with any confidence here, good luck with that. This is not a program you can trust until they show me more. Mackenzie Milton's pretty cheap if he is going to play the whole game against a Wake defense that gave up 434 yards per game last year. I could see some interest in Milton, right? He's had huge games in the past at UCF. Obviously, his leg almost fell off, and he's half robot at this point, so who knows? He's playing behind a terrible offensive line. They barely threw the ball downfield against Jacksonville State, an FCS school they lost to. He only had 4.3 yards per attempt in that game, all underneath routes because they're scared of him, obviously getting hurt again behind that offensive line. I would be too. It's not pretty, but you could see some GPP appeal, right? If everything goes right, you could see it. Wilson's their best wide receiver. Sounds like he should be back this week, but missed last week. But they spread the ball out. Right now, the leaders are Parchment at 4.2K, has 9 targets. And then McLean has 8 targets behind him. So, where is McLean? McLean's min price for some reason. All right, McLean shouldn't be min price. Didn't notice that until now. I think there's just their talented freshman. Didn't do my homework because I didn't look into it. I think that's their talented freshman who's been on the field a decent amount. It looks pretty good. All right, at running back, Corbin obviously had a big game against Notre Dame, but hasn't really had many big games in the past. Texas A&M transfer, people talked themselves into him about 4 straight years. He did not a whole lot, and then once they finally stopped talking him up, he goes off against Notre Dame, right? So he's just one of those players who's been there forever. I'll say the snap counts don't look great. Corbin has 34 snaps, Ward has 28, and then Toafili, a very good running back as well, at 3.6K, has 26. So Ward or Toafili, if you're really paying down, I guess has some viability. But in the 3-way RBBC, I just don't know. I can't really see paying up for Corbin, but he probably has a decent game against a bad Wake defense. So all in all, this game, it seems like there should be some interest when the total 61.5, but it's hard to pick your spots. It's hard to pick your spots. If you're playing a lot of lineups, obviously you're gonna throw some in here or there. All right, Wake. Basically going against this Florida State defense. They have a pretty good rush defense, but not really sure what else they have, to be honest with you. I just haven't really seen much from them. Secondary hasn't looked very good. It didn't look very good on the Hail Mary. Good job, folks. Defensive coordinator didn't look great. Coach didn't look great in the quotes afterwards. Yeah, I'm just not sure about this Florida State program, but anyway, this is a winnable game for both sides, right? So Sam Hartman at 7.8K. If he was a little cheaper, I'd probably play a decent amount of him, but I just don't know how to feel. He's going against a defense that got torched by Jack Cohn, so you could see the path there, right? Jakari Roberson at 6.8K. I think you need some ownership on Jakari Roberson. Probably going to be pretty highly owned. He's been an absolute target hog. This year has 15 through 2 games, but that looks modest compared to his totals last year where he was getting over 10 targets every single game. He returns as the clear number 1 guy. Donovan Green, their second best wide receiver, is out for the year. So Roberson, it's his show. Behind him, Keyshawn Williams has 10 targets. A.T. Perry has 7. He's a big wide receiver, kind of their downfield threat, kind of their red zone threat. And he's been on the field the most as well, so A.T. Perry at 4.9K is not terrible. And then Stewart has 8. So Stewart and Moore, and I believe these guys are splitting snaps. That's a good passing attack, and they're both really cheap, but hard to go to them when they're splitting snaps. I mentioned I think Florida State's rush defense is pretty good, so I'm not sure how much of these guys I'll be having. Beal Smith is splitting carries with Turner a little bit, but Beal Smith is the number 1 guy. I think some of those splitting carries have been because they've been playing really bad competition. Beal Smith is no Kenneth Walker, and this rush D, they ran a lot last year, but if it wasn't Kenneth Walker running, they weren't super effective. So I'm not sure how effective they will be against FSU here. But he's pretty cheap for what's decent rushing attack. All right, last game here. Tulsa versus Oklahoma State. Last game here. Getting pretty late here. Hopefully my eyes aren't getting too droopy. Don't see I'm not falling asleep. Last game. Tulsa, Ohio State. Did I just say Oklahoma State? Oh my gosh. Tulsa versus Oklahoma State. Yeah, we have Ohio State, Oklahoma State, and Oregon State. And I think every time they're here on DK, they just say OSU. Figure it out. I should say the OSU. It should be TOSU. Anyway. Davis Brin's 4.8K, but Tulsa's offense has done absolutely nothing. Now, they're going against the Ohio State defense that is in shambles right now. Is in shambles. They were bad last year. Looks like they're bad again this year. And that just shouldn't be the case at Ohio State. They recruit too well. Their players are too good. Looks like they're going to make some changes. Ryan Day said going forward he's not really sure about who's going to be handling the defense. If you're not sure who's going to be handling the defense, it sounds like it's probably not the defensive coordinator anymore. So, sounds like they're making changes. Definitely need to make changes. So, who knows? Here going against a Tulsa offense that just isn't good. I'm not sure it matters. I'm not really sure you can play Davis Brin. He's done nothing. If you're going to play their wide receivers, I suppose you could if you're paying down. These guys all get decent targets, Crawford, Johnson, and Santana. I think the pricing's a little off here. Stokes, a 4.1K. I don't think he should be their most expensive guy because, he only has 2 targets this whole year. I think Johnson would be the guy to look at if you really need a cheap guy at 3.3K. He's pretty decent, get some targets, but that's really reaching, right? As far as the running backs go, Prince had 16 snaps to Brooks' 12 last week, so they are splitting carries. Prince looks like the better player at 5.5K, but I think that might be a little too expensive, even though Ohio State's rush defense hasn't shown a whole lot. They got a bunch of 5-stars there. I'm just not sure how much Tulsa scores, to be honest with you. I think this could be the bounce back game defensively Ohio State needs, right? Pretty good matchup to get now. All right, Ohio State. man, CJ Stroud, after being reasonably priced the first 2 weeks, and us playing him, hopefully you stacked him with Jackson Smith and Jiba and Garrett Wilson. Like I said, might make for a nice affordable snack. It's getting late. Stack. Hopefully you did, because that was pretty nice last week here. But now he's 10K. It's just difficult to play. Tulsa's defense, they're pretty good. They're probably overmatched, definitely out-athleted here, but they're pretty good defensively. They've held down Oklahoma State's offense 2 years in a row, although I'm not really sure how much that is saying, given what we've seen from Oklahoma State's offense. But they're pretty good. They return every starter from a year ago except Zaven Collins. That's a big starter, right? First round of the Cardinals, but they're decent. Stroud at 10K, I just don't really see how you can build a great lineup doing that. I guess you could stack him with Wilson, who's pretty cheap. Wilson was way too cheap last week, was pretty good to us at 5.9K. He's still too cheap at 6.4K. Olave is their number one guy, but the discrepancy should not be by that much. Olave has 17 targets, Wilson has 14, Smith and Jiba has 11. These guys are on the field for pretty much every single snap, and I do think they are priced in the correct order. I just think there's too much of a gap here. I think Olave and Wilson should be closer. I think Wilson is one of the best wide receivers in college football, and he plays for a Death Star. Even though the Death Star lost last week, they still put up 600 yards. So they're still dangerous. I think Mine Williams is a little expensive. I played him over in Prize Picks. He was only 13.5, so go play that if you haven't. If it's still there, 13.5 is where I got it. He is their number one guy, but it's not by a whole lot. So he had 14 snaps last week, and then Henderson saw more. So after only seeing 2 snaps in the opener, Henderson saw 12. Master T didn't see any. So we are seeing this backfield shape up a little bit. I think it's going to be Williams as the 1A, Henderson as the 1B. Henderson, one of the most talented running backs in all of college football. We've seen what he can do when he has the ball. He has a touchdown in back-to-back games after hardly playing. They should have the ball more in this one than they have. Right, definitely more than they had in the opener, and we've seen how dangerous they could be. So I think either one of these guys are playable. Williams is really expensive, hard for me to get there. Henderson, I'm assuming he's going to be pretty popular every week, but keep in mind he won't be on the field a ton. All right, folks, that does it for the slate. Quick slate review. Like I said, quarterbacks, they're really expensive. Good luck if you can pay up. If you can't, you're probably looking in that mid-range. Paying down is pretty tough this week. Is really pretty tough in my opinion, and it gets pretty ugly in a hurry. So quarterbacks, if you're playing one, if you're a guy who does that, this might be the week for you. Or maybe 2 mid-range guys is the way to look. All right, as far as running backs, like I said, that 7K range is pretty good. There are a few guys in the mid-range, but nobody I love. You could look at Broussard, Brooks, Shipley, Gray, Henderson, and Gibbs in that mid-range is not too bad. I don't really know about paying down for running backs on the slate. I think if you do, you should look at Jones on Coastal Carolina at 4.4K. As far as wide receivers, I think this is a really good wide receiver slate. I don't think these guys are crazily priced. Like David Bell being the 4th highest priced wide receiver when he's an absolute stud. You could get there. Even Meyer, Mechie. I think Roberson's very affordable. I think you probably want 2 really good wide receivers at least on the slate, and I think you could easily afford that, especially if you go mid-range at quarterback and then the studs at wide receivers. But again, this is just me. This is just one guy's opinion. You could construct your lineup however you want. That's part of the beauty of DraftKings. But that's just kind of how I'm looking here at this slate. So once again, thanks everybody for listening. That'll wrap up week 3. I hope you learned something from this. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter at YonkersCFB. Again, prize picks, I'll be tweeting those out. Make sure you follow. Make sure you get those prize picks in if you're in an eligible state. If you are a first-time depositor, go ahead and get your free $100 using promo code Yonke, YONKE. I will put that link in the description. So best of luck this week, everybody. Let's go see some winners.